It's not always about having the biggest farm, it's about maximizing your acres. And a farm like this is such a great example of how you can have these smaller quote unquote pieces and still have a great hunting piece. All right guys, welcome back. We're here at the homestead plot. As you can see behind me, a lot of work's gone into making this one come together. We got the monster buck multi-year in the ground. Really excited to see what this plot's gonna look like in the coming months. I'm gonna continue to manicure it because I want this to be a good food source coming into this season. One of the things that came out of the homestead episode was that there were a lot of comments, questions about farm, how attainable they are, specifically small farms, and a lot of questions about, you know, the financials that go into that. So today we're gonna go over to the Last Chance Farm because I just think that that farm is just the epitome of a small farm, great huntability, access-wise, and it's something that I think that most individuals can afford. And we're gonna dive into some too about the food sources, what I'm gonna do for my plan moving forward on that farm. I'm really looking forward to spending more time over at the Last Chance Farm to continue to enhance it, to make it even more huntable and really just a bow hunter's paradise, or even just a hunter's paradise, because I think that that property itself has a unique blend of the upland side of it, the timber side of it, and really has that component of being that small dream farm for a lot of people out there. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this week's episode. I think it's really relatable for anyone looking for that first farm or that small farm that can be really a hunter's paradise. This is the grand opening to say down here on the Last Chance Farm. This is a new property to me. This farm has plenty of cover and diverse cover. So we have the tree component of it, you know, we have the native grasses component of it, but it's lacking a food component.
Yeah, dude. He's gotta be 5+. He's a big old fruit.
All right, so we made our way over to the Last Chance Farm. I just wanted to give a brief overview to start this off. What makes up Last Chance? It's 25 acres. You know, we talked about this being a smaller piece. It's such a unique blend where we have 11 acres of CRP on the north side of the native grasses, and then we have a tree planting on the south side. You know, the tree planting component is such a unique component for just being able to hunt, the different terrain features that comes along with that. And then the property is actually divided north and south by a creek. And as I'm out here, I want to walk through the different projects that I identified early on this smaller piece. And you know, really what made it affordable, because I think it's in a criteria that it's under $250,000, you know, and I think from a down payment perspective and for just owning it perspective for what the payment is going to be for a month, you know, there's a lot of variables that go into the financials, but this is, you know, roughly a $1,500 a month payment is what this would be just to own this property. You know, not talking about the enhancements, not talking about the income that's coming off of it. But I want to walk through some of the different projects that I identified early on that I did, you know, for this property that I think that could make it better. You know, I wanted to enhance bedding, I wanted to get food on it, and I knew that access was going to be critical because on these small pieces, how I'm getting in and out is going to be critical for these small ones. So the first spot that we're going to start is that we're actually going to start the food plots that are carved out into the CRP, and let's walk over there real quick and I'll kind of dive into how that whole idea came together. Which it looks a little different right now because I'm just finishing getting this planted again this year. So this has multiple different thought processes that go into this, because day one, I closed on this property in August. I knew I wanted to get food onto it. Once I had a purchase agreement in place, with this being in CRP, I had to work with NRCS to get approved for how much food plots I could actually have on these acres. And essentially what they allowed me to do is that 10% of the total acreage. There's actually two separate fields here. So essentially I have this field and then there's another one on the east side. And although this maybe doesn't set up ideally for late season hunting, I want to maximize how much food I can get off these acres. And what I think about when I'm doing that, this can also lend itself to upland bird hunting. Since we have such a good native stand of warm season grasses and forbs off here to the north, this is going to be a really good pheasant hunting piece, and hopefully get some quail out here as well. I've already seen those out here, so it's really cool to see that. Hopefully we can just get them some food. And you can actually, as we work our way over here, you see the remnants of what we chose to do for some of our food last year, because we still have a really good cover crop standing on this property that we used the one plot ASAP, no huddle, you know, on this property. And then this is some winter wheat that's standing out here. There's a few little bit of oats, and portions of it I have tilled under now, but some of it's still standing that I just drilled directly into. But you'll notice right away as we work our way through this plot that it's not just a generic square. You know, I created an L shape with the idea that there would be a redneck soft-sided blind or a blind sitting right at this location. Any southerly wind I could have blowing off the actual creek bottom. Going back here, thinking that later on in the year there's not going to be as much bedding going on in the warm season grasses, where this would be a spot for a bow hunter's dream. South wind right in my face, food off to the right, food off to the left. It just makes a lot of sense where you're going to have a lot of deer within bow range in this location. And it was definitely something I noticed last year too, that as soon as we put food out here, they would just come right out of the woodwork on these warm season grasses, that they would just be popping up out of nowhere. Dave and I saw that several times when we hunted right along the creek, that they would just pop out of nowhere. So when I talk about how these two fields are divided, you know, one of the things that Ryan and I did last year is that we actually used fire to burn off this plot once it was sprayed and dead. And then on the other side, we didn't burn off the thatch. And there's actually a creek system that runs north and south that divides these two fields. So it was cool to do a cool like side-by-side comparison of these two plots of how well they did, because with those native warm season grasses, they just put so much thatch on the ground once you actually kill those off, that we definitely had better germination on this side compared to what it was on the actual east side. But this year, there's still cover crop over there. I mean, it was a little slower going, took a little bit more time to establish itself. So rolling into year two, you know, keeping in mind that upland bird component, wanting to get greens on the property, that's what I took into consideration when I put the plots in again this year. So this is actually planted to sorghum, and what I did is that I've never personally done this, but I've had a lot of friends and people do this before, where they broadcast clover into the sorghum, because those are two crops that can grow well together. So I broadcasted a multi-year into this, so hopefully that'll be a nice lush stand underneath the sorghum. And then on the other side, I did velvet season, which is a really unique mix that Monster Buck makes for specifically the off season, the growing season for velvet. Has sunflowers, millet, sorghum in there, cowpeas, and soybeans, which is a really unique blend. I used it a little bit last year and I was really happy with it, that you can get that summer tillage and you get that actual tonnage out of it during the summer months. And then I can actually convert that into Monster Buck's rut greens going into the fall if I wanted to till that under, to just double crop it essentially, which is great to be able to do that. I think that knowing these smaller properties, you want to make sure the hard part is that how do I get enough food on this actual property? You know, there's less than 2 acres of food on 25 acres. So I want to maximize these acres specifically. And I think I feel really good about how I'm setting up for early season specifically. And also keeping in mind the upland bird side of it, that I feel like I'm in a really good spot coming into the season. Well, we're just getting ready to walk across one of the newest additions to Last Chance, which is going to be this crossing. And this is really going to change, you know, how we access this farm, and then really how I'm able to manage this farm, which is a huge thing. And it's sort of funny, as we cross this creek right here too, it also almost symbolizes the equipment side of it too, because until now, I've never been able to get equipment on this side of the creek. And that was always a big variable that I was always battling. And I do think it brings up a good talking point, because I'm very fortunate that I have friends with large equipment. Mike's been very good to me, you know, whether it's a skid loader, having a drill, because, you know, my first year on this farm, you know, I was able to use the Great Plains drill to get food on it. But this plot over here was arguably the best food I had on the property. And this comes back to the roots of Midwest Whitetail, is that this is almost a poor man's plot type of application, because up until last year, I had a 30 horse tractor and I made a little jump up and I have a 50 horse tractor now. And just have a few implements to go along with it, with essentially just a disc, you know, and then a mower, and that's really all I have for equipment, you know, type of thing. But this is an example of you know, what you could do with a broadcast seeder, fertilizer, you know, back in this location, and then just a backpack sprayer. And I essentially made a really nice food plot out of an open area back here on the farm. I do want to talk about this plot. You know, I talked about it being like a poor man style and how this came together. Essentially what I did is that I came in with glyphosate, Roundup essentially, in a backpack sprayer, sprayed it off. Fast forward a couple weeks, myself and an intern came in here and we burnt this off and you know, really rid all the thatch. There's a bunch of canary grass in here. Broadcast that day into the actual, you know, burn, you know, following that. And we were very fortunate that we got quite a bit of rain after that, and that was late going into the season. As you look around here, this is not the most beautiful plot, but there is a ton of food here. There's all kinds of different chicory. I see clover coming in really strong. If I could mow this later on this year, there's gonna be a bunch of green food here come season. There's a lot of food back in here, and this is an excellent example of low budget, maximizing acres in an area where it's hard to access. You know, it's hard to get in and out of here, you know, especially with equipment. So that was something I took into consideration. I'm really happy with how the outcome is. Well, we're getting ready to come up on what I would say is one of my favorite spots on the entire farm. And this was a spot that I identified pretty early on when the property was for sale. You have a lot of different terrain features that are coming together. So essentially we have a travel corridor from the west, big block of timber. There's a pond location right over my shoulder. And now we have an opening right out in front of us where it just made sense for this to be a food plot. And it was already cleared out, you know, allow that open area to become that food plot. And now I'm standing underneath one of my favorite tree stand locations on this farm. I guess I should say the only tree stand, the permanent tree stand location on this farm, because I do a lot of hanging hunts. But this is a very scenic spot that once you get up in this tree, you can see a lot of this bedding area. And Dave and I had a really cool hunt here last year with a big mature 8-pointer with a kicker off the side.
Yeah, dude. He's got to be 5+. He's a big old brute.
So rewatching that hunt, it's so cool to see that deer behavior like that. I've never seen any type of lip curling like that, and to have it in such close proximity to the tree stand, it was really cool to have that. While we walk through this topic of hunting smaller farms and accessing, you know, I think that there's two big things that work against smaller farms and maybe people would have a negative, you know, connotation towards them. First of all, I think about access. You know, I would tell you that it's a challenge. I'm still working my way through a piece like this. You know, I feel like one of the things I really wanted to incorporate with it being the crossing this year could really change how I can do that, because we just talked about 2 stand locations, one for a south wind, one for a north wind, but those can completely change if I was able to get permission to come off a neighbor's property. Maybe it's from doing some type of, you know, labor for them in exchange, you know, whatever that could be, you know, that could really change that. And I also think too, it's just the component of, am I gonna overhunt it? You know, I think that that would be something, as if you're gonna think about this negatively, you know, can you potentially overhunt a piece like this? And in my opinion, I think the answer is yes. I think you could. The one thing working towards this is that, you know, you're not necessarily holding your deer specifically on a 25-acre piece. You know, there are older bucks that are gonna get smaller core areas, but this is a piece that you're gonna have a lot of transition deer. You're gonna have them moving through here, checking the bedding area, checking your food plots. But I do think it is a situation that you need to pick your spots on these types of farms. So maybe this isn't one that you're gonna have 30 sits in a year. Maybe you're gonna have 5, but you're gonna wanna make sure that those 5 sits are gonna be on the right days and you're gonna have the right conditions for getting in and out, because your margin of error on a piece like this is gonna be much smaller. Well guys, we're just getting ready to wrap up today's trip down to Last Chance Farm. Really hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. You know, when we talk about these smaller pieces, you know, I wanted to recap and talk about how the budget is critical in today's day and age, today's economy, everything that goes into that. And hopefully you guys understand too that this is attainable out there. You know, making these decisions for the food plots, making enhancements to the property, it's not always about having the biggest farm, it's about maximizing your acres. And a farm like this is such a great example of how you can have these smaller quote unquote pieces and still have a great hunting piece. And this is one that I'm proud to have my name on, and looking forward to what the future is going to hold for the different enhancements that we can make to it. Appreciate you guys joining me here on Midwest Whitetail.